So I like Dark Souls, and I just decided to rank all the bosses, so yeah, here we go. Please don't mind all the ads on the side of this window. In fact, I should probably just crop these out of the final video. So starting with Asylum Demon, I think that Asylum Demon is probably the perfect opening boss for the Dark Souls series. Just because he ends up being so difficult for new players, myself included. Like, it took me forever to beat him, and yet he's actually probably the easiest boss in the whole series. So I think he just shows like how far the series has come as a whole and the genre and the level of difficulty that is ramped up. So I kind of feel obligated to put him in S, but that's mostly because he's so iconic. So I feel like I actually have to put him in A, but I might move him up later. When it comes to Taurus Demon, I think that he's alright, but his boss arena is so narrow, but at the same time I think that encourages you to look around, because it ends up being really hard to dodge his attacks in that arena, so I think it encourages you to look up on that tower and think that maybe you should just do a plunge attack. But overall, he's not like an incredible boss, so I think I'll just throw him in B tier for now. As far as the gargoyles go, I think I actually want to put them in S. That's mostly because they were the first boss that I ever played that actually gave me a really hard time. And I actually ended up summoning Solaire for them on my first playthrough, and that was before I knew that summoning in a Soulsborne game is kind of frowned upon. But I think it still shows the level of difficulty they pose for a new player. And overall, I just think they are a gank boss done very well. Probably the best type of gank boss in my opinion. Now with Capra Demon, I think we probably have my first hot take when it comes to this tier list. Because I know Capra Demon gets a lot of hate for his arena, and I know I just talked crap about Taurus Demon and his tight arena, but I actually don't think Capra Demon is that difficult or weird of a fight. Because once you figure out that you can just walk up the stairs and like do a plunge attack or just wait for the dogs to come up and follow you and take them out, the fight actually becomes really simple, and it might take a couple tries, but overall it's super simple. And I think that once the dogs are down and you're just fighting the Capra Demon, it's actually like a pretty fun fight and the arena is pretty manageable. But it's still not a great fight, so I think I'm just going to put them in B tier, probably below Taurus Demon, but I guess you could say they're interchangeable. Now, Gaping Dragon is just, it's a really cool fight because of the shock factor when he comes out from that dark abyss behind him, but like, once that gets past, it's not a really engaging fight. You just kind of hang out around his butt and smack him a bit. It doesn't really live up to the hype that it generates with its opening cutscene, so I think I'm just going to put him probably in C because he's not even difficult, which Capra Demon and Taurus Demon both have, especially for new players. Now, Quelaag, yeah, I think we're gonna have to put her in S tier, and I refuse to elaborate on why. So let's just move on from that. Iron Golem, I think Iron Golem is actually a really good fight. It's just not as good as some of the others, so I think I'll put him in A tier. Maybe B tier because he's easily cheesable and he's just like kind of basic and not quite as intimidating as he looks, so maybe I'll just put him at the top of B tier for now, but I might change that. Now here comes the biggest hot take of this tier list, and that's my opinion on Ornstein and Smough. I know Ornstein and Smough are considered to be like the best boss in this game apart from like Artorias, but I actually think they're one of the worst because I think as far as gank fights go, they are just not very well designed. And you have Ornstein's glitchiness and just the general jank of the fight, and the arena is, in my opinion, not very interesting. I mean, they're definitely intimidating and they're difficult, and their cutscenes are pretty cool, but they're just not quite as good as all the hype would lead you to believe. And this is just my opinion, but I think I would put them probably at the bottom of A tier. I just don't think it's a very well designed boss. And I never really look forward to them on a new playthrough. Like, that's not just because they're difficult, because there's difficult bosses like Artorias or like Calamite or something that I look forward to, even though they're difficult because they're fun fights. But Ornstein and Smough just isn't that fun in my opinion. So hate on that opinion if you want. It's just what I think and how I feel. They're still A tier, just not quite the high S tier you might expect. And yeah, call me crazy, but I think Bell Gargoyles are a better gank boss fight than Ornstein and Smough, and I think they're FromSoft's first, oh actually no, because they have Demon Souls, but I think it's the first gank fight of Dark Souls 1. Actually, it definitely is. And I think they nailed it and didn't make it feel like a gank. And so I think Bell Gargoyles as the first gank fight of the Dark Souls series is probably the best one. Now moving on to Gwendolyn. I think Gwendolyn is a trash boss, and I don't think there's going to be that many people who are going to contest me on that. Gwendolyn in general is just an extremely boring boss. Sometimes frustrating, but overall he's like super easy and just boring as hell, so he's just gonna go straight into F tier. Like, I'm sorry Gwendolyn, I know people like him because he's like a femboy or whatever. I guess F can stand for femboy in this case, but it's just a boring fight. Now, Crossbreed Priscilla. I think the lore is really cool. I'm gonna have to put Crossbreed Priscilla in S tier purely because of her lore. And again, I refuse to elaborate. Now let's move on to Pinwheel. I think Pinwheel, most people would put him as an F, but he's not really that annoying or that boring. Like, he has interesting mechanics, like with the clones and everything and the fireballs. Like, it's interesting, but he like never actually hits you with his fireball, so I'm gonna have to put him in like D tier. He's definitely more boring than Gaping Dragon because like his entrance isn't that dramatic or anything. He's alright. One redeeming factor that Pinwheel has that I think most people overlook is his lore, especially in relation to Nito, First of the Undead, and the relationship that that family that became Pinwheel has with him. I think all that lore is really interesting, and so I think Pinwheel deserves extra points for that. So maybe I actually will put him in C tier just because he has really cool lore, which is something that can't really be said for the Gaping Dragon as far as I'm aware. Now, I don't know how many people will agree with this, but I think Nito is actually the worst boss in the game. And yes, I would put him below Bed of Chaos. I think he is a trash boss fight. He has the worst kind of ads. He has like tons of skeletons that are going to be chasing you around the whole time, and those giant skeletons that can two-shot you. And he has that one screaming move with like the bloody blade that comes out of the ground, and that attack is harder to dodge even than like Nameless King's lightning bolts. And his run back is absolutely fucking miserable. I mean, I guess his lore is okay, but overall I just think he is actually the worst boss in the game. And like I said, I would put him below Bed of Chaos, and we'll talk about why in just a moment. So yeah, F tier, bottom of F tier for Nito. I think he is trash. Now, Great Grey Wolf Sif. I think you're probably going to guess he's going in S tier. I'm going to put him actually above Crossbreed Priscilla. First of all, the fight with Sif is just really fun, and it's really challenging for a new player. It's not all that difficult, but it is really fun and pretty intense when you first do it, especially from the shock of fighting a giant wolf. But most importantly, the lore of him surrounding like Artorias and Manus and everything. That lore is just really cool and also really sad and heartbreaking. So I think we've all had that moment where we watch VaatiVidya and we learn the lore of Sif and Artorias, and then we go back and experience that secret cutscene for the first time, and it just fucking melts your heart. And I think for that, so far, Sif deserves to be at the top of S tier. Now, moving on to the Four Kings, I think they're an okay fight. They're definitely one of the more intense bosses in Dark Souls 1, mostly because you have to rush in order to prevent yourself from getting outnumbered by the Four Kings that are spawning in. But apart from that, they're not really that interesting, but I think they're still good, so I think I'll put them at the bottom of A tier for now. Probably below ONS, but maybe above. I'll put them below for now. Now, it took me a second to recognize what the heck this picture was signifying, but I think this is Ceaseless Discharge, and I would probably put Ceaseless Discharge in C, like close to Gaping Dragon, because like he's cool and he has cool lore, and it's kind of sad how he's like trying to protect his sister, and you know, the lore about his family and the Witches of Izalith. I think all of that is cool, but the fight is just so easy that it's hard to talk very much about it or give it any real credit. But I think I'd put it above Gaping Dragon just because of the lore, so I'm gonna put him at the top of C tier. Now, Fire Sage Demon, or Demon Fire Sage, I know most people would put him in like F because he's a reskin of Asylum Demon, but I don't think he's that bad. He introduces the slightly unique mechanic of his exploding fireballs, but it's really not that interesting. I think I'd put him in like D tier. I think he's probably a little more interesting than Pinwheel, but at the same time he's just a reskin and he doesn't have like any lore besides the fact that he's a demon in Izalith, and you know, he was a demon that was created by the Witch of Izalith trying to recreate the first flame, but that could be said with any of the demons from like Capra Demon to Taurus Demon and even Asylum Demon from the beginning of the game. So I think he's just not very interesting, but he's not like that bad even though he's a reskin, so I'll just put him in D tier. Now Centipede Demon I am obviously putting in F tier, probably at the bottom or just above Nito, maybe even below Nito, and that's just because it's such a boring boss fight and the camera is so hard to deal with, and even though there's a cutscene at the beginning you still can't tell what the fuck you're even looking at. Like, what even is this thing? Like, yeah, it's a centipede, but where's its head and where's its tail and what the hell is even happening with this thing, and why does it have two like almost humanoid or dinosaur like legs? Like, if they're gonna make a centipede demon, it should be a little bit more centipede-like and not just like a centipede head on two dinosaur legs. It's so weird. Overall, the fight is just not even fun, so I think I'm gonna put him at the bottom of F tier, and he has like no lore. Now, Bed of Chaos, I understand most people would actually put Bed of Chaos at the like rock bottom of F tier, but I think Bed of Chaos is actually slightly overhated just because it's such an easy fight. And I know some people might not agree with that, but there are some really easy cheese tactics you can use, to the point where Bed of Chaos is just more like a minor inconvenience on your way through the game and not really like an egregiously terrible boss, because you can get past it super quickly, so it's like not really a huge deal. Now don't get me wrong, it's definitely not a good boss, probably below Demon Fire Sage. I just think Bed of Chaos doesn't deserve quite as much hate and the reputation that it has, just because if you know what you're doing, it can be such a minor inconvenience that it's like hardly even a boss fight. So I think I'll just put Bed of Chaos at like the top of F tier. I wanted to say D tier, but then again, I think Bed of Chaos is like more on the level like Gwendolyn and Nito. So it's a bad boss, it's just not quite as bad as some people think. Now Seath the Scaleless, I think I'd put him in like low A or high B, because he's like okay, and his lore is actually like really good. It's really interesting how he has this complicated relationship with the dragons and how he betrays the dragons to serve Lord Gwyn, and eventually ends up doing these fucked up experiments on different creatures in the Grand Archives. You can look up his lore if you want to. I think it's definitely worth it, and just for that I think he deserves to be probably in the bottom of A, but as far as the actual fight goes, it's not really much to speak of. You just smack a crystal and then just circle around him, stick by his butt and avoid crystals. He doesn't really have any attacks. I think he might have like a swipe or something, and he does like a tail swipe or something, but overall it's just not that interesting and not difficult. So I think I'll just put him at the bottom of A tier. Now moving on to the Sanctuary Guardian. I think Sanctuary Guardian is one of the best fights in the game, probably in S tier, maybe like above Quelaag but below Priscilla and Sif, or maybe even above Priscilla and below Sif. It's a really fun and challenging fight. He has a lot of different moves, and he's probably a more fun fight than Sif actually, but I just don't think his lore is as interesting. I actually don't know if the Sanctuary Guardian has any lore, or at least any good lore, so I'm just gonna put him like below Sif in S tier. Overall, a really good fight, one of the best fights in DS1, just kind of forgettable because he doesn't have a good cutscene or anything. Now moving on to our boy Artorias, you just know I'm putting him at the top of S tier. He is the best fight in Dark Souls 1, and probably one of the best bosses in Dark Souls as a whole, including Dark Souls 3. He's just a really good boss, he's very well designed, his lore is super good and super interesting, and he has a relationship with Sif, Lord Gwyn, and a ton of other characters. Overall, just an incredible boss fight. Now Calamy is definitely a good fight, I just think he might be slightly overrated, just because I personally didn't find him that interesting. I don't think his arena is that good, and overall kind of an underwhelming dragon fight, especially with what could have been done with, like, I don't know, even the Drake from the bridge in the Undead Settlement or whatever it was called. Undeadburg, I mean, I'm thinking of Dark Souls 3. Overall, Calamy is a really good fight. I think I'd still put him in S tier, but probably at the bottom of S tier, or maybe in the middle. I think he might be better than Bell Gargoyles. Maybe I'll actually just put him below Sanctuary Guardian. He's still really good, maybe just not quite the high S tier that most people think he is. Now, Manus. I have some words for Manus, because Manus was the only boss in Dark Souls 1 that I could not beat on my first playthrough. Now, I also did not beat Calamy on my first playthrough, but that's purely because I had zero idea he existed. Don't ask me how I missed him, but I did. But Manus, I found him and I literally could not beat him. I quit the game and I moved on to Dark Souls 3 and just ended up pretending he didn't exist. And then eventually I came back and beat him, but it still took me like 50 tries. Even after beating Dark Souls 3, beating Nameless King and Soul of Cinder and everything else, even after that, it still took me forever to beat Manus. He's definitely the most difficult fight in Dark Souls 1. Now, as far as the quality goes, I think he's probably S tier. I just can't decide where to put him. Probably below Sif. I think I'm just more emotionally attached to Sif, but Manus is still really good, so I'll put him just below him. Now, Gwyn, Lord of Cinder, the first Lord to link the fire. I think we all know that Gwyn is going to be in S tier. Probably my favorite thing about the Gwyn boss fight is the music. It's just iconic at this point. But more than that, it's just a really fun and challenging fight as long as you don't parry, which I did not know how to do in my first playthrough, so I ended up having a really rewarding experience with him. And the whole moment of just like walking through the kiln of the first flame and entering the boss room to challenge him is just super epic, and it's pretty touching. I think it's a really impactful moment, so overall, I think I'm going to put him in S tier right under Artorias. It's a really good boss fight. And for some reason I saved Stray Demon for last. There's not really much to say about Stray Demon. I guess I'll just throw him like along with Demon Fire Sage because he's just a reskin of Asylum Demon with like 1 or 2 extra moves. I think his main redeeming factor is that he's in the Undead Asylum where you can go back after you've played through more of the game. And I think being able to go back and refight a boss that you've beat before that might be a little bit different mechanically. I think it's just a cool concept, but still not a good boss fight. I think I'll put him at the top of D or maybe like bottom of C. I think that's a good spot. Bottom of C under Pinwheel seems right. And for some reason, whoever made this tier list put the Hydra in this, so I guess I'll just... I mean, Hydra is like a mini boss, but I guess you could call him a boss. I mean, he's alright, but he's kind of janky and a little frustrating. He's just not that interesting. I guess I'll just throw him in the top of D above Demon Fire Sage. So yeah, that's my Dark Souls 1 boss tier list. I won't waste your time. I will get out of here. See ya.